everyone, and welcome back to my channel. Today I have another book haul for you, and this time I want to do something a little bit different. I know that right now, on Booktube you'll see a lot of people doing like horror reads for the fall and for Halloween, but I had an idea to do, some books that are really great to read around this time of year, around fall time, that aren't necessarily horror. I kind of have a pretty wide variety of books here, and they kind of span different genres. And so I'm going to do this in two parts. I'm going to do four of the books today, and I'll do the other four tomorrow, so that you guys can really get a pretty good breadth of variety as far as what to read during fall if you aren't in the mood for straight up horror or the supernatural spooky type of books, which are really popular this time of year. All right, so this first one is a classic. A lot of you who are, well read have probably read this either in school or at some point on your own, because it's kind of hard to go through school, especially like undergrad, without reading The Scarlet Letter by Nathaniel Hawthorne. This is an interesting book because when I first read this, I hated it. I had to read it in, I don't remember if it was like early in high school or sometime later in middle school, but I could not stand this book. Um, Actually, I don't even think I finished it when we had to finish it, but I got this again in college in an American literature course, and I really, really loved this book. After reading it a second time with a better understanding of writing, a better understanding of Nathaniel Hawthorne himself, and the meaning behind this book. If you're not familiar with this book, it's about a woman named Hester Prynne who is labeled as an adulteress. So in her New England town, she has to wear the Scarlet Letter, or an A, on her chest for an adulteress, and because of that, she has to kind of form this new role in society because she does have a husband who's away. She has a daughter, and she can't just go out and interact with people the way she used to. But the reason I think that this is such a great fall read is because when I think about fall, I think about the colors of the leaves, I think about pumpkins, I think about, all of the typical things. And where I live in northeastern Pennsylvania, we do get a lot of that stuff here. But I think that, when you kind of look at New England, or I've never been, but just kind of the stereotypical image of what New England is like, it seems like it really encompasses fall perfectly. And this book does that as well. The second book here is a totally different genre. Now we're moving on to fantasy. And I'm a huge lover of fantasy. Most of the books on these shelves behind me are fantasy books. But this is a classic, and this is something that I think everyone should read at least one time. The Hobbit by Tolkien. And this is kind of what kicks off the whole Lord of the Rings trilogy. This is an epic book, and it's not a big book. It's not a very big book, but what it does do is kind of set the stage for what happens later on in the Lord of the Rings, and the subsequent books in that series that really made Tolkien famous. The reason that I think this book is so perfect for fall is just because the way that the Shire is described. The Shire is where the hobbits in the book live. Um, it's really cozy, and it's really like kind of when you are reading Tolkien describe the Shire and describe where Bilbo Baggins lives, and Bilbo is the hobbit who the story follows. You just really get those perfectly comfortable, warm, cozy vibes. And I think that's kind of what you get, or what you want to look for when you're shopping for like fall decor or reading like a fall book. You kind of want what fall makes you feel. And I think that this book does a really good job of that. Now, the next is an anthology. I mentioned a couple anthologies in the last video that I made about some fall reads. But this is an anthology of classic slave narratives. Um, all of these are good, but the ones that I suggest people read is the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass. I think that's, from start to finish, that is the best written, the most engaging, and really a story of triumph where Frederick Douglass is recalling his life from a child to a young man learning to read and write, and to finally, what he deals with on the plantation, to finally finding his freedom and writing that book. That's Frederick Douglass's narrative in the life of a slave is my favorite slave narrative. But my second favorite is Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl by Harriet Jacobs. And Harriet Jacobs is very interesting because I don't know how much that one is known. That's in this collection. I actually have both of those books on their own, but I just figured that it'd be easier to show you guys in this anthology. But Harriet Jacobs, she fled her plantation where she lived, and she lived with her grandmother, who was a free woman, and she lived in her attic for 7 years, reading the Bible, reading newspapers to try to keep her mind occupied because she wasn't too far from the plantation that she had fled from. It's very, very interesting, and just some of the things that these slaves go through when you read a slave narrative, it's almost unimaginable. It's almost unimaginable to think that at one time our country was like this, and that, obviously people, Jim Crow is not that far away. There's people in our lives who recall Jim Crow and lived through Jim Crow, but you know just 150 years ago, it's really not that long ago. So but there's so much nature involved in slave narratives. There's so much nature involved in slave narratives. Just the descriptions of the plantation and plantation life, the descriptions of the surrounding areas. A lot of times the slaves will run away and they'll run through the woods or the forest or the swamps. And nature is obviously a very powerful element. And it's also something that many of us are attracted to. There's beauty in it. There's beauty and there's violence. It's scary. Nature is very scary. And some of these slaves have to, endure nature. And so that's why I put this on the list for a non-horror book to read in the fall, because I usually come back to these, every couple of years, and I'll read these. And, personally, I really enjoy reading these during the fall. Now, the last book on this list, I don't know how I feel about this book. I've read this book twice. The first time I read it, I really liked it. The second time I read it just recently, I don't think I was a fan of it. Maybe I have to wait a little while. Maybe I have to read it again. I have a professor in college, one of my mentors. We still get together and have cigars and bourbon to this day. And he always says you can't begin to understand a text until you read it 3 times. So maybe that's why I'm such a big rereader. And maybe that's why, I'm kind of reserving judgment, because I haven't read this 3 times yet. But this is The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. This book hooks you immediately. This book, it's not horror, it's not fantasy, but it's kind of somewhere along that magical realism, line, where it deals with a lot of like real people and real problems, but it's done with magicians, and magic is real, and there's like a magical circus, and it's a really interesting concept. And there's actually some stuff when I was first looking this book up, I heard a lot of negative comments about Erin Morgenstern's writing, but I actually think her writing is pretty decent. And sometimes I can be critical of the way an author, the prose that an author uses, but I actually think that there's some pretty good writing in here. But I do want to read the back to you guys so that you guys can see what I'm talking about when I say that this book really hooks you, and it sounds very interesting. The circus arrives without warning. No announcements precede it. It is simply there, when yesterday it was not. Within the black and white striped canvas tents is an utterly unique experience full of breathtaking amazements. It is called Le Cirque de Rêves, and it is only open at night. But behind the scenes, a fierce competition is underway. A duel between 2 young magicians, Celia and Marco, who have been trained since childhood expressly for this purpose by their mercurial instructors. Unbeknownst to both, this is a game in which only one can be left standing. So it's really cool because, these 2 young magicians are kind of trained from a very early age to learn magic and hone their magical innate abilities to be the greatest magical duelists that, are alive. And then they have to compete with each other, but they end up falling in love. It's good. It's good. It's good. It's not a bad book. It's not a bad book. But like I said, the second time I read it, my mind kind of changed on it. But just with the magic, just with the whole like circus environment and the wonders that are in this book, it is kind of fantasy or fantastic at times. And I just think that this is a really nice book to read around this time of year. So definitely check this out and make your own judgments. Also, this is a pretty cool book. So you see, it's got some cool cover stuff going on. And like I said, guys, there will be a part 2 of this video where I'm talking about 4 more books, and that will be the next video that I make on this channel. So definitely stay tuned for that. And thank you.